about you any day, anyhow. It don't matter, not a while since I thought about you, babe. Hey, since I thought about you, babe. Hey, since I thought about you, baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Love of Fishing podcast. I'm your host, Lyle Gator, and today I'm talking about fishing in the South. I realize that a lot of my content is, pretty focused on the North, especially fishing around Niagara, but every year, lots of people that are in the North, they say, screw winter, I have to go south and get warm. And I talk to a lot of folks and give them just some tips and tricks because this is something that I've done a few times now. To make their trip better, to improve their fishing, and just sort of some differences between how we fish here and how you can effectively fish in Florida. So I wanted to do a podcast to share what I know, and if you have any other tips, feel free to leave those in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Spotify, there's no option to comment yet, but these are just some things from a northern perspective that you can do and bring when you head south to make your fishing better. I'm going to talk about a few things through the podcast, what to bring in terms of gear, some key differences between fresh and salt water, what to do, like in terms of where you can fish, and how to prepare. Because these trips they're never long enough, I can tell you that, but they're often, between 5 and 10 days. So the opportunities to fish, especially if you're going down with your family or with a loved one, may be kind of limited. So how you can make the most out of your time that you have to fish. So in terms of gear, one thing that I find really important is understanding how you can actually get your gear down to your location. I got an email a couple weeks back from a subscriber, and he was asking, what my tips were for what to bring in terms of rod and how to get that on the plane. And if you've never flown with a fishing rod on a plane, it's not that easy, or at least it's not that cheap. A travel rod is really a great option if you can get something in the 7-foot range that usually breaks down in 2 or 4 pieces and will fit in your suitcase. So if you're able to get some kind of a heavy-duty cardboard tube or a plastic tube, that rod will fit in there, and there's a very low chance that it will break. If you have something that's longer, they do make an airplane grade rod tube. I believe Plano makes one, and I have that. I travel with it all the time to protect my rods, but that does get expensive depending on your flight carrier and what their baggage restrictions are. So that's an option. You can get something, I think, all the way up to 8 feet. But usually airline providers are charging for each inch, each foot, something. It's pretty expensive. So if you're able to, get away with something small for inshore, like a 7-foot rod that breaks into 2 or 4 pieces, that's probably your best bet. The other thing that I recommend, if you're trying to do some surf fishing down there with a heavier, longer rod, is just buy like a cheap rod down there. I know everything is so expensive these days when it comes to fishing. It's really unbelievable. But, if you got a chance to pick up a cheap rod, you really don't need anything fancy if you're surf fishing. It doesn't have to be that sensitive. It just has to be strong. Pick up a rod down there, and then when you're going to leave, give it to a kid. I know I've done that when I've gone on a few trips. The reel you can always bring to and from, but the rod, there's fishing gear at every Walmart down there. Their Walmarts are pretty incredible in Florida, at least. So consider that if surf fishing is what you want to do. But anything else, your hooks, stuff like that, you can bring down pretty easily in a suitcase. So I'd say if you want to do surf fishing or anything with a heavier duty rod, just pick up a rod down there and leave it there. It's probably going to be cheaper in the long run than trying to ship it back and forth. And you also avoid the chance of heartbreak when, your favorite rod ends up getting broken on the plane. I have done that. So in terms of gear, pyramid sinkers for surf fishing, everyone kind of looks to those as the main sinker. I really, really have gotten away from pyramid sinkers. I really like the Sputnik sinkers, which are a lead weight with metal arms, sort of like coat hanger type wire that comes off. And what that does is it wedges itself into the sand. It gets caught in the sand and stops your bait from tumbling around in the surf. So those are kind of specialty products that you can pick up down there. I know I've gone many times to Florida with pyramid sinkers, egg sinkers, stuff like that. Spend the money when you're down there on some sinkers, and that really improves your presentation. In terms of line on those reels, you're going to want, for inshore, a 3,000 to 4,000 size reel is good. For throwing small swim baits, top water, stuff like that. If the area that you're going has snook, probably a 20 or 30 pound braid. And then if you're around some jacks or maybe tarpon, snook, bigger snook, that is, you might want to up it a little bit, but do some research around where you're fishing. But braid is really good. For the same reasons it's good in freshwater, it's good in saltwater. And you can get some pretty heavy line that's still pretty easy to cast and thin. So 3,000 to 4,000 size reel for inshore. If you're going to surf fish, if you have any kind of carp gear, like bait runners are really good. Big pit reels, those are good. Salmon reels, 4,000 to 5,000 size. That's going to be best for the surf in case you're making a long cast. But really for the northern guys going to the south for surf fishing, I've had luck catching small sharks, but the best, sort of most accessible bite is going to be that first sandbar, fishing in between the beach and that first sandbar. So pompano, whiting, maybe black drum, maybe red drum, those sort of fish that run that first bar, where you don't have to make a huge cast. You can bring your own gear and that'll work. Once you get out into the deeper water stuff, that's really where you need that special gear that you're probably going to have to purchase down there. So if you're heading south and you're from the north and you got bass tackle, stuff like that, key in on those species that live pretty close to shore, because you're going to be able to match the tackle to those fish. The other thing that I should mention is check the regulations in the state that you're visiting. I know Florida has the requirement that you purchase a saltwater license now. It wasn't always like that. For surf fishing, it was classified differently than, if you're out on a boat. Charters don't need fishing licenses. I don't think. Like if you fish on a fishing charter, they cover it. It's confusing. In terms of how it works in Ontario. In Ontario, you just need a fishing license, but down there, freshwater, saltwater, they have so many brackish water areas. So just make sure that you get the correct fishing license, so that you're covered where you're fishing. Florida Fish and Game do a great job at providing opportunities for anglers, which as a non-resident angler, we get to enjoy when we go down there. So definitely make sure you get your fishing license and support wildlife and conservation down there. So some key differences between fresh and salt water. Apart from the fact that the water is salty, tide is the main thing that you are going to want to pay attention to. And, the freshwater fishing in Florida, some of the freshwater species can still be affected by tide, even when you get way upstream, I'll say, of the ocean. The tide is still affecting that fresh water because it's pushing it, it's pulling it when the tide goes up and down. So paying attention to when the water is moving, anywhere around high tide, when it's approaching high tide and when it's leaving high tide is going to be a good time. And same for low tide. Low tide can really pocket those fish in deeper holes, and when the water's moving in and out around that low tide, that can be a great time, especially if it coincides with a sunrise or a sunset. If you're fishing on the beach, my experience has been an incoming tide coming up to high tide is the best. That's when the fish feel most comfortable closest to shore because they have more water to use. So when you're making your week's plans or your day plans with your family or just on your own, really focus on those tide charts for the area that you're in to help maximize your bite window. So that would be the main thing, the main difference between fresh and saltwater. I always have fun picking up the little graphics, little magazines. They have lots of free fishing content down there that you can get just to check out some of the different species and learn about them, what they like to eat, where they like to live. It's really fun to chase new fish that behave completely different than any fish that we have up in the north that are freshwater. So enjoy that learning process. Some options that you have when you're fishing down there would obviously be surf fishing, so off the beach, if you have access to the beach. This is a really simple way to have a chance at catching some cool fish. I mentioned the high tide thing. The other little thing that you can pick up on is where exactly on the beach you are fishing. So a beach has structure like anything else. It's not always hard structure like, piers, cribs, anything like that. Sometimes the actual sandbars are the structure that the fish are relating to. You might say, well, how do I figure out what that structure looks like? And this is something that you're going to want to research if you're going to do some surf fishing, is how to read the surf. This is kind of similar to when we're fishing a river and we might see, a current seam or some boiling in the water, which indicates that there's a rock and then a calm spot behind the rock. Well, the same thing happens with surf fishing where the waves are breaking. And it's going to be too hard through a podcast for me to explain what you're looking for. But basically, if you look out into the ocean on a beach and you watch the water for a while, you'll start to see patterns of how the waves break coming into shore. And that is going to tell you where the structure is, because the waves have to break over sandbars, through deeper holes, and stuff like that. So on days where you have some waves, where the surf is up, check out some resources online to figure out where you're going to target on the beach. And generally you're going to look for those deeper troughs, those deeper runs in between where the waves are breaking, because that's where the fish are naturally going to feel more safe when they're swimming. So we have surf fishing. The baits that you're going to use for that, pretty simple. I have a shrimp allergy, so I do tend to stay away from shrimp. My hands peel. All my skin comes off my hands when I touch raw shrimp, so kind of sucks. But you can use raw shrimp. There's lots of it down in Florida. You can use squid. You can use these things called fish bites or fish gum, which are brightly colored. Usually they're brightly colored strips of scented. There's like a nylon weave that goes in it, and then it really honestly looks like chewing gum, like bubble gum. But basically, you cut a little strip of that off, put it on your rig, and then it's usually tipped with some raw shrimp or some squid. Those are the most popular and accessible options. There's also fiddler crabs are good for inshore. Sand fleas, if you can find them or get them. I haven't had great luck finding those, but pompano really love sand fleas. And then your other stuff like cigar minnows, mackerel, different kinds of cut bait. You can usually find that at the local tackle stores or at the Walmart in the freezer. So those are the kinds of baits, the kinds of rigs They do sell a lot of surf rigs down there. Usually they're pretty accessible. Every store has them. But I'd say watch out for pre-tied rigs. A lot of them are way too heavy. They'll be tied with like 80-pound mono, and that's just too heavy. So it's basically a double dropper rig or a chicken rig. If you look that up and how to tie it, it's like a beefed up version of our perch fishing rigs for us here in the north. So a surf rig, great option. Again, those Sputnik sinkers that I mentioned before, they will help you stay grounded and keep your weight from sloshing around in the heavy surf and waves and current, and that'll keep your bait where you want it to be. So 9-foot to 11-foot rod, 20 to 30-pound braid, Sputnik sinker, 3-ounce, 2-ounce, maybe 5-ounce if it's really windy, and then one of those surf fishing rigs with preferably 20-pound test if you can tie those. Some of them have floaties on them, some of them don't. If you look them up, you'll see what I'm talking about. But that's surf fishing in a nutshell. Inshore stuff is really fun, especially if you have a stand-up paddleboard, kayak, anything like that. Those are great adventures to have, casting around mangroves, little bays, canals, docks are really, really popular areas. And that's really going to depend on where in the south you are. The species are going to vary, but inshore opportunities are endless. You can bait fish. You can fish with shrimp under a float. You can fish a Carolina rig with shrimp around docks, around deeper holes, sandbars, bridges. There's fish basically everywhere in saltwater, which is really, really cool. But if you do a little bit of research, usually a YouTube search or a Google search around the area that you are, you'll get a feel for the time of year and what's available there. The last thing that I want to talk about is how to prepare. So I mentioned about doing the research online. YouTube is a great way to get some spots. People post, popular community holes. Those are usually good, especially if you're just looking to get some action. If you're taking kids fishing, piers are great. A lot of piers in Florida are pretty cheap to get out on, and usually there's good fishing opportunities off the piers. So there's no shortage of places to fish down there. They have a great culture that really supports people getting out fishing. It's really woven into the cultural fabric down there, and it's pretty cool. Every time I go down, I'm blown away, and when I come back to the north, I'm reminded that fishing is it's really not that popular. For us that are in the community that love it, it's everything to us. But down there, it's a huge part of their economy, and you can just see that everybody recognizes how popular it is down there. So prepare by doing your research. Get your gear. You can certainly get a lot of the gear here, like your line, maybe a travel rod, stuff like that. But yeah, other than that, look at your tide charts. Kind of have a game plan going in. What are going to be your prime days with the sunset, the sunrise, and how that relates to the tide. Tie your rigs. You can pre-tie them and put them in a, either on a pool noodle or sometimes like vitamin containers. You can sort of pile them into there, and you can do all your tying ahead of time. Other than that, just enjoy the ride. Fishing in the south is amazing. It's a great way to catch some new species and gain an appreciation for the biodiversity that the ocean has. It's a really, really cool place. Jellyfish, all the little tiny bait fish, and the barnacles, oysters, stuff that's growing on the rocks. Open your eyes down there. It's really, really cool. So hopefully if you're making a trip down south this year, this video has helped you out just to kind of get an overview of things that you can look for to help improve your fishing. I myself will be headed down on February 15th. I'm fishing the Florida Redfish Series again, the Panama City Beach event. Very, very excited for that. I've got a different kayak that I'm taking this time where I can stand up. Shout out to Victor Papais, who has graciously loaned me his kayak, and I'm bringing my trailer down. So going to be riding in style this year, a little bit more comfortable. Very, very excited for that. And, still making notes, still looking at maps, and doing the same old pre-fishing routine that I always do. So looking forward to my time down south. I'm going to be down there for 2 weeks. I definitely recommend, if you have the time during the winter, if you work construction, landscaping, anything that you can get some time off, go down and check it out. If you can, it's really, the people are great. It's beautiful. Great place to go. So hopefully this helps you out. Guys, I appreciate you listening to the Love of Fishing podcast again. We are coming out with some new content in the next couple weeks, and you don't want to miss it. If you haven't already, please subscribe on YouTube and give us a follow on Spotify. The podcast is in both locations. If you want to connect with me, hit me up on Facebook, Hooked on Niagara Guide Service, or hooked_on_Niagara on Instagram. I'm fairly responsive if you have fishing questions, and would love to chat. If you want to book a trip this year, I am starting to book my spring, summer, and fall fishing on the Niagara River, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie. I promise you that it will be a great fishing experience for you and your crew. I could take up to 3 people, and depending on what you want, we can make it happen at any time of the year. Thanks again for listening to the Love of Fishing podcast. I'm your host, Lyle Gator, and don't forget to get outside and go fishing. Peace.